All right. Hi, and welcome to From Many People's Strength, the podcast that covers Saskatchewan politics and current events. My name is Cory, and my pronouns are he and him.
And my name is David, and my pronouns are they and them, or he and him.
And I guess we have quite a few stories to cover.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's actually been a busier week or 2 weeks this session, but it seemed like
it. Felt like it, yeah. I'm going to be honest, it's been a much, much busier 2 weeks for me in like non-news life. So I haven't been following nearly as closely as I should, but I'll try and give my 2 cents as much as I can. And yeah, you're right. There's things seem to be coming pretty fast and furious. So
yeah, I have to admit, like at my job, things were really, really busy this last week, and I worked an extra day. Like I did my Fitbit, and I had no less than 20,000 steps every single day.
Wow, good for you. That's awesome.
So
I wasn't quite that way. I was busy at a new job, but my new job involves a lot of sitting at a desk still. So less on the Fitbit.
Yeah, a lot of mental work though.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we'll still be able to come up with some thoughts, I think. So
possibly.
I'm never short on opinion. So ideally, I will try and make it at least somewhat of an educated opinion.
We'll start off with this one article from CKOM. Sask credit rating downgraded after provincial budget.
Yeah.
So the government will go from a AAA rating to an AA plus. Which is, I guess, the next highest tier.
Yeah.
In Moody's, it's the Moody's credit rating agency.
Right. Because
there was other downgrades previously for other agencies.
Mm-hmm.
In this article, they talked to a professor of economics at the University of Regina, Jason Childs, who talks about, he says the downgrade isn't a massive change, between AAA and AA+, but if we somehow get hit by a huge inflation or interest rates start to go up because of that inflation, then the gap can widen. I think that's a bit speculative. Like if this happens and if this happens, then we can see a change. But okay.
Yeah, and governments in Western democracies have good credit ratings. Like at the end of the day. Governments are a safe borrower. Are like downgrading to AA plus. Like you can tell by the term.
Yeah,
it's still it is still
very
a safe borrower. And like again, this is like when people buy provincial bonds, like and basically invest in the province. They're still it's a safe form of investing, whether it's individuals or whether it is corporate investors or institutional investors. So, at the end of the day, it's I don't know if anyone would be surprised by the downgrade. COVID has hit. We got downgraded by Standard & Poor's in 2017. That's Moody's is arguably the more important of the two, or of the three, because I think we got downgraded by DBRS.
That's right. In 2020.
Star in 2020. So these are all things that, people like me pay attention to, but
I just had a conversation about this book on MMT with a guy. So for my other show. So we talked about this MMT and how it's very US centric, right? And It's very when you have a federal government, often there's a lot of focus on the idea of debt and how much each citizen owes for the debt. And it's all a bunch of silliness, really, for federal governments. But provincial governments owe their money to, they use the federal currency. So they don't quite have the same free reign to spend as a federal government does.
True. Whether it's federal or provincial, though, the majority of the debt is domestically held. When we think about when we think about federal debt or provincial, some of this money is owed to me. Like I am I am one of the people who, and like a lot of people listening probably are too, whether they realize it or not. If you're invested in a pension, you probably have a portion of this type of debt, because if you have a mutual fund, or again, Saskatchewan debt, not as much as federal, but like if you have some sort of broadly based investment where there's a fixed income portion, sort of fixed income is the terminology for things like debt, you probably own part of this debt. You definitely own part of the federal debt.
Yeah.
So it's we owe it to ourselves. Now, which of us owes it is different, right? Like we all collectively share in the owing. We don't all collectively share in the owed to.
Right.
So that that makes a difference, and that impacts things like wealth gaps and whatnot. But the downgrade is a way of the NDP scoring some political points on the Sask Party. It probably does represent some things the Sask Party could have or should have done differently over the last decade and a chunk.
Right.
But are we going to be bankrupt because of this? No. Is it going to make our debt cost a little bit more in the very long term? Yeah, a little bit. But.
Yeah, like the one quote in the article says, what was it? Something about the province is going to have to spend a little bit more because of this. And I mean, as far as the individual person in the province, this isn't hurting us, actually. Like, not right now, anyway.
Yeah. And like, it is the way it hurts is more in that it shifts money upward, because the people who own this debt are more likely to be wealthier to begin with. Because if you don't have investable income, you're not investing in bonds, and you're not owning the debt. So what this means is a greater portion of the taxes you and I pay will go to people with investments and investment holdings. So, but again, a lot of some of that will go to middle class folk as well, because again, this is going to be within pensions, and it's going to be within more lower risk things. This isn't. Hedge funds are not owning are not owning provincial debt.
No. Sask archaeologist says search for children's remains at residential schools will be a long and difficult process. And I think this is the kind of thing that is going to take years, right? Like to find every person that has been lost, who has died in these schools. Officially, there are 566 recorded deaths of students at residential schools in the province. But the Clark, who is an assistant professor of archaeology and anthropology at the University of Saskatchewan, thinks the number will be much higher. And officially, 4,100 children are unaccounted for, although that number could be as high as 6,000. That's a lot of kids that are just unaccounted for. And where they are, where they ended up, I guess, we do not know at this time. It's really disturbing that can happen under, supposedly under the government, or like these institutional watches that are supposed to care for these children. I don't know.
Caring for these children was never the goal.
No, that's true. Yeah,
I think that was about as, and you know what, I don't even think that was the superficial goal at any point. I don't know if at any point anyone believed that this was actually about caring for them. Maybe people not involved, but this was very overtly about colonialism and assimilation. This was the idea of kill the Indian, save the child, and if you have to kill the child as well, so be it. Like that was the mentality of these schools.
And that's how you get like that many unaccounted for children, because nobody was watching for that, right? Like they discarded them as though they didn't matter. And
I wish I had the exact numbers again, but I believe it was in World War II, the mortality rate of a soldier on the front lines in World War II was 1 out of 25. Over the lifetime of residential schools, it was 1 in 24.
Right.
So going to a residential school was more deadly for these children than a soldier on the front lines of World War II.
So that's
spread out over the entire history of it, and there were ebbs and flows. There are thoughts that it was as much as 1 in 2 in the first 50 years.
Right.
So yeah, like 50-50 chance of living.
That's when I was discussing the Kamloops school, and 215 kids found, and that school was only open for 79 years, which is that's an insane ratio of kids dying every year. So.
Yeah, no, and like,
there we go.
All right. and again, that's like, we found 215 in Kamloops. That's probably not everyone.
Right. Yeah.
Right. There were probably other deaths that weren't even found then within the 215. So I think this is going to be a long, arduous process. I think there's going to be a lot more pain before we move into healing, but there has to be.
Yep.
And every time I hear another story, as I always think of the Malcolm X anecdote, and I won't be able to quote it directly again, and he told it a number of times, but the idea of, if you sink a knife into my back 9 inches, and you pull it out 3 inches, that's not healing. Like that's not moving forward, right? Like we're not actually healing until the knife is all the way pulled out and the wound is dressed. And I'm misquoting Malcolm X, but I think he goes on to basically say, and most white folk aren't even admitting that the knife is there.
Yeah.
I think we're, as a country, white people are finally starting to see that the knife is there. And even that, you still have people denying that the knife is there.
Yeah.
Which I am flabbergasted by. Like, I'm baffled by a lot of reactions to Indigenous issues by white people within Canada, but the inability to even see the problem is so mind-blowing that I almost can't comprehend how that level of willful ignorance is possible.
Yeah.
But it apparently is, and hopefully those of us who are seeing it can do what we can to move forward and start working on actual healing. Put pressure to. It seems so simple, but like, just get freaking clean water to everyone who lives in this country. Like, there's no reason anyone within the borders of this country should not have clean water. Period. Full stop. No excuse.
I do not care how much it costs.
No.
Like, this is basics.
And Singh talked about that, right? He had that, and someone was asking about that, and he just said, this is a bullshit question. We would never ask that question if it was Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. And within this province, we would never ask that question if it happened in Wascana or around the university in Saskatoon. I don't know where the wealthier neighborhoods are in Saskatoon, but we would never ask these questions if it happened in Regina or Saskatoon or Moose Jaw.
No.
People living in a small town in Saskatchewan that was predominantly white would never ask that question of their city council if they themselves had contaminated water.
They would just say, get us clean water.
Fix it.
The end. Fix it.
Period. Full stop. That is we're talking about one of the pivotal cornerstones of living in a society going back 3,000 years, 4,000 years. Like, this is literally, you look to ancient civilizations and why they formed. Access to clean, potable water is literally cornerstone of existing. And again, this is, I don't say it's off topic, but it's expanding the topic to more than just this article. But
Yeah, it makes me think because in Regina we do have like lead pipes or whatever, right, in the cathedral area, and as soon as they discovered that this was a situation that was at hand, they put a plan into action to try and fix it. And yes, of course, as bureaucracies sometimes do, they hum and haw, and it's going to take X number of years to fix everything. But they've got all these other plans in place in the meantime, like free bottled water and stuff like that, to just to make up for the fact that there's not clean drinking water in this area of the city. And the idea that you don't have these same exact programs and issues, like ways of dealing with the problem on reserves, it's absurd. But
it is. It's
all right.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still muted.
I'm sure we will continue talking about this as similar stories come up. It is unconscionable.
Yeah.
And I think we would just run in circles continuing to talk about it at this point, because I think we'll just repeat ourselves. But I am glad there is.
But every time,
like political movements. But.
Yeah, every time that we see another situation where somebody doesn't have clean drinking water and then gets it dealt with, I think it's valuable to bring up when this is the case, right?
Yeah.
Sask Auditors Report says it's time to start using enforcement on non-compliant cannabis stores. That's just the headline. This article is like, it goes through a few of the recommendations from the auditor.
I got to admit, but the combination of headline and like sub-headline
yes, that's quite
is
good.
The weirdest combination. So for those who are listening rather than watching, the headline, Sask Auditor Report says it's time to start using enforcement on non-compliant cannabis stores. The sub-headline, which is supposed to be talking about a different part of the auditor report, but it doesn't say that. Improvements also needed to help preschool-aged and kindergarten-aged children succeed.
It does imply that the two are linked.
That does imply the two are linked. That's the editor may want to take a look at how that is presented. Yeah. But anyways, that is an editing issue and not actually the story part. So
no, I did have to read it a couple times though, because at first I was like, what? Wait.
Why do we want kindergartners getting more access to pot? That seems not the thing we want to do.
Yeah, it seems like the opposite. But
are kindergartners opening up head shops now? I don't understand.
Where did they get the investment capital?
They're white and have rich parents.
Yes, that's right. That's how you do it.
So, yeah. Auditor's report. Again, I don't know how much we want to dig into this.
Yeah, it's just there's a few things that need improving in the province, according to the auditor. And
it'll be her last. This would be her last audit.
Right.
Auditor's report. Her term is done. So, it's not a good report for the government.
No.
Auditors' reports rarely are, though. That get to give them a little bit of
right. To be fair,
yeah. It's pretty rare for an auditor's report to be glowing.
Yeah.
But it's they're underfunding health. They're not enforcing their own rules when it comes to pot shops. We're not doing what we should be on early learning.
Yeah.
We need to reduce short-term remand. If you go through the article, I don't think you're going to be surprised by anything in here. I'm sure most of this is things that you and I have said before, both philosophically and economically.
Right.
It's strange how conservatives pitch themselves as the fiscally responsible ones, while at the same time wasting tons of money on ideological things that have been proven to not work.
Yeah. And then they go and get us downgraded for our credit.
But again, the short-term remand, right? It's we're spending a lot of money on things that don't work.
Right.
And it's ethically, I would argue within my moral framework, it is like an immoral thing we are doing, an unethical thing that we do. But even within a more centrist philosophy, I would still say it is ethically questionable at best.
Right. Yeah.
And also, we know it is expensive.
Yeah.
So shouldn't be putting people in cages, like unless literally someone's life is in danger or it's needed for public safety. Humans in cages is not a good idea.
And then it should be very, very temporary.
Yeah. If we, I don't know what more to say. It's we don't spend enough on healthcare. We don't spend enough on early childhood education, and
which is we knew this stuff, right?
We knew this, and essentially one of the other things, not so much with the pot part, but all of the others, the consistent underlying philosophy, I don't know what the term to use would be, the underlying complaint issue raised by the auditor is it's skimping on prevention and paying for it in the back end with having to address the issues. Like, every dollar you spend on early childhood education saves you multiple dollars down the road. Yeah. Like, same with preventative health care, and same with rehabilitative justice rather than carceral justice. Like, all of these things are ways of spending small amounts on prevention to save large amounts on cure. And we don't do it. And again, this is an auditor. This isn't some left-wing social justice warrior snowflake. This is someone who, auditors are renowned for being boring people. I don't know her personally, obviously, but this is the most boring way of analyzing government performance possible. It's an auditor's report,
right?
And
there's
even
no
they're saying the same thing.
All.
No,
yeah.
And arguably one of the best auditors in the province. That's why she's in the position she's in. And we need to. In one way or another, we need to get a government who understands that investment pays dividends, either by this government figuring it out on their own or changing governments at some point to one that does.
Regina needs 24 cannabis stores to disrupt the black market, according to a city report. Yeah. So apparently the pot market in Regina is still, or the black market pot market is still thriving.
Of course it is.
Of course, yeah. I don't know. I think we've talked about this before. Like, we're boring old guys.
Yeah.
We go to the store because it's easy. It's the way it works. But
I haven't. Yeah, I will admit I have not bought pot in probably close to 2 years or more.
Okay. Yeah.
I have not been partake. Well, I didn't partake at all over COVID. So I would probably more than 2 years because it was the last time I partucken would have been 420 back in 2019, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm even extra boring. But yeah, it's people want to go to their old dealer.
Yeah,
and it's easier and cheaper, and they don't run out and they have what you want.
Yeah, and if you have a relationship there, then that's a thing that works as well. Where you go to a store, like even like the ones that I like, they're very corporatized, right? Like they've got a rigid kind of outlay. You can tell it's a store, it's a shop. It's not it's not your buddy's house, right? Yeah. So,
and I like so many things, I think the important part is and it probably won't happen, but if you're more than doubling the number of stores in the city. Who's getting those licenses and who's allowed to open it? I would certainly like to see communities that have been disproportionately impacted by criminalization of drug use in the past be given access to licensing in order to compensate for the disproportionate punishment they've received under pre-legalization formats or regimes or however you want to call it. I doubt that'll happen. I'm guessing it'll be freaking Shoppers Drug Mart at some point.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's going to be something silly like
Sobeys.
You'll just have to pick it up when you pick up your beer.
Which, that probably is where you're gonna see things in 30 years, 20 years even. In the meantime, like I said, I would very much like to see people from marginalized communities who are, like I said, disproportionately impacted by drug criminalization in the past be allowed to receive this licensing. But we are pretty certain that won't be what happens.
No, it'll be some kind of paid lottery or some damn. So Evan Penner arrest investigation 1 year after the event. There are 5 civilians to review findings of a probe into a violent July 2020 arrest. Evan Penner, who is from Manitoba, is a 27-year-old Cree man, and he was arrested in Saskatchewan. And a video showed Penner was being punched, pepper sprayed, and tasered, which advocates say the level of force was excessive and called for the swift firing of the officers involved. And I mean, when you're doing all 3, that seems pretty excessive, right? Mm-hmm. There's no reason for you to be tasered and pepper sprayed or punched as well. Like, okay. But so we're having a 5 civilian commissioners were expected to do their final review. So they've come to we welcome a full and transparent investigation by the PCC and will continue to do so in the future, said Chris Rhodes, the new president of the Saskatoon Police Association, which I don't know. Will anybody face any consequences?
Even if they find fault, they don't, my understanding is this commission has no actual disciplinary authority.
Right.
They can do investigations, they can find a finding, they can give a report, and then when all is said and done, the police chief is still the one who decides. It's still settled internally.
Yeah, that's right.
And if he does punish them, as we saw in Regina, the cops will still be allowed to appeal.
Yep. The union will fight for the offending officers, even as the representative says that they they're supportive of this transparent investigation. These unions, they always talk a good game. Police unions are never actually helpful when it comes to this stuff. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, and it's pretty much these complaints are never, out of 186, 11, out of 186 complaints in what window of time was it? I think from April 1st of 2019, in a 1 year time span, right. 11 out of 186 were considered substantiated, and most were thrown out in one way or another.
Which is absurd, right? Like, yeah.
51 are still underway. So
okay, so I mean that's something.
So I guess that's not. So that would be 11 out of 130 something if we're not
right.
If you take the 51 out of the denominator.
42 were unfounded. 20 were withdrawn. 43 did not support further investigation. 13 were resolved. What?
So I don't know what resolved.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
My guess is resolved would be before they found the point where there was a substantiated or not, whoever the complainant was agreed with something.
Right. Yeah, like something, like you say, 20 were withdrawn. Under what circumstances? What was the reason for the withdrawal? Like, it just a little bit more transparency. This doesn't. This looks like an attempt at placating critics, not actual true transparency. But yeah. I've been told that I'm overly critical of the police sometimes. So
okay, I still go back to what other job would not face this, would not face 10 times this level of scrutiny.
Oh yeah. No, you're right.
Right? If you had an unruly and disruptive customer in any retail store and a store clerk came at them, right? Pepper spray, punching, taser.
And a taser. Nope. You don't get to do that.
No. It's or being rude to a customer gets you fired from most jobs, right? Like it's the level of protection from misconduct. And again, it's why if it's only a few bad apples, why are we not seeing every single other member of the police force standing up and demanding that these commissions be more strict, that the bad apples be dealt with more harshly? Like why don't we see that? Why doesn't every single other member of that police force come forward and say this is unacceptable behavior? We will not tolerate this within our force.
It's almost like it's not just one or two bad apples.
And like it's always saying to the public, "Oh, that's not who we are. That's not us," as opposed to saying to the offender, "Hey, that's not who we are." Like it's who are you talking to when you say that's not who we are?
Yeah.
Are you making an excuse and trying to defend yourself, or are you speaking out against what's actually happening and demanding consequences for those who behave this way?
Yeah.
Because again, these are the ones that get caught. Like this was on videotape.
Right.
This isn't even this doesn't even speak to the ones that are not on videotape.
Sask RCMP hired 2 psychiatric nurses to aid in crisis intervention. The nurses, both trained in psychiatric care, will provide intervention, assessment, support, recommendations, and referrals to residents in Saskatchewan experiencing a mental health or addiction crisis. As part of a 12-month pilot project, the Saskatchewan RCMP has hired 2 psychiatric nurses at its Operational Communication Center to support people in crisis. This is a move that I agree with the action. I don't think that it's enough. Like 2 isn't going to cover the whole province. I guess it's a pilot project, but anything that reduces the number of police involved in any situation is good. So.
Yeah. And like perfect world, instead of the money going to the RCMP and then the RCMP hires these psychiatric nurses, I'd rather that exact same amount of money not go to the RCMP and just hire psychiatric nurses.
Right.
Like, why are we like? I would rather
are they the middle?
I would rather the RCMP not get their taste.
That's right.
Like it's, but again, like it's good. It's like it's I don't know. It's like the mafia running a soup kitchen. Like the soup kitchen is great.
Right. Yeah.
Do you really want? Yeah. Do you really want people who abuse their power and use violence to solve their problems to be the ones that are ultimately holding the purse strings of this good program?
Right.
And like, again, maybe this is where that, we are too critical facet comes in. It's good. Like, don't get me wrong. It is a good thing that you have less problems being solved with angry people with guns and more problems being solved with trained professionals who are actually qualified to deal with those problems.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe this is the beginning of a path that proves us wrong, right? I've like folks like you and I.
I would be open to that.
Folks like you and I have been saying one of the reasons we argue for defunding is reform hasn't been working. We've been calling for reform for 50 years and reform hasn't been able to work. So let's scrap the system that's broken and recreate something new with law enforcement being a small portion of a larger functionality. But if you can prove that that's not needed by making the current system actually function properly, more power to you. I'd love to be proven wrong on this one. Yeah. So hopefully this is a step towards proving us wrong, because if less people die, if less people are harmed, if more people get mental health care, I'll jump up and down and shout that I'm wrong from the middle of Albert Street if that's what ends up happening. I have no problem with that. So.
Yep, that's right. Not up to snuff. This is from Press Progress, so I know right away. I know right away that any conservative person that might accidentally listen to our show,
it's the Fox News of the left. Like they certainly
they have a slight bent for sure.
Similar to Fox News, when they're actually reporting on news, they're usually fairly accurate. When they're actually talking just facts, as soon as they start editorializing, they get a little creative.
Yeah.
So
they do like to be critical of right conservative parties and governments.
Yeah. So,
but Saskatchewan's lack of a provincial distance education policy has made learning challenging for many students during the pandemic. Education experts agree, according to this article in Press Progress. I think that that is a fair statement, just as from a parent's perspective. I think our education boards were not given the appropriate tools and funding to do things the way they needed to be done to keep everybody out of the schools. And I think that was because we had a provincial government that thought we need to send kids back to schools. Like they started off from that perspective and didn't really have any room for wiggle, right?
Yeah. We also had a provincial government that likes to tell school divisions what they can and cannot do, but sure as fuck doesn't like taking the blame. So she's very, very much fine with when things are complicated, then being like, oh no, you guys figure it out.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing I'll say, again, this speaks to the press progress piece. It's not like Saskatchewan is the only conservative government in this country. Like, they are not just saying the Sask Party did badly. They're saying they did the worst in the country, which means they also did the worst out of any of the other conservative governments. So I'm sure I have some left-wing friends in Alberta who would say, no, they didn't. But there's quite a few conservative premiers right now. And Saskatchewan seem to be the ones that sort of dropped the ball the most. And again, I think part of it was confusion. Like there wasn't a plan. There wasn't a top-down systematic strategy for approaching things. One of the arguments Scott Moe said during the election debate was the idea that the province is too diverse. We've got, it's too different in different parts of this province to have a systematic, province-wide approach. So we couldn't, and which, like, I don't know, like, has his base not traveled to other parts of the country?
Because it's possible that some of them haven't.
Probably they haven't, but like, I'm sorry, small town Northern Ontario compared to Toronto probably has a greater differential of community differences than Regina and small town Saskatchewan does. Like that difference is significantly greater than the difference between, Regina and Humboldt, or Humboldt and a rural, and like an RM where it's multiple small communities coming to a single school, right? Other provinces also have rural-urban divides, and sometimes even greater ones. Yeah. If for no other reason than the urban is more urban than our urban.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but in any case, there wasn't a province-wide strategy. We didn't really have something. And I'll take my hat off to every single teacher and administrator in this province who did the best they could with a shitty situation. I'd almost be willing to even give the government I don't say a pass, but give them a lot of leeway, because in spite of everything I just said, they were still put in a shitty spot, like dealing with COVID. No one, no one knew the right answer a year and a half ago. I remember I'd love to maybe go back and listen to some of what we were talking about, and when we first started this podcast, about how long we thought some of this shit would happen. We were already well into COVID by the time we started it, but even still, like March, April, May of 2020, I don't know if people were expecting schools to be intermittently open and closed in the spring of 2021.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
So, yeah, but the key takeaway is figure it out for next time now.
Yes, that's
Don't wait until next time happens. Figure it out for next time before next time.
Yeah.
I think it has to be the key takeaway. And similar to what I was saying on the economic stuff, either this government needs to figure out how to be the government who can do that, or we need to elect a government that can do that.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, I interrupted you there with my
oh, no, I was just going to say, I have 3 children that go to different schools in different divisions. And the French school division seemed very back and forth, off and on a lot. My son's school is a high school in Regina. And the system they had where they divided the year into 5, some like quints, they called it, and rather than semesters, with just a morning class and an afternoon class. It seemed very, I don't know. I thought that it was amazing, honestly, the idea of it. And I thought it could have worked really well if there hadn't been the odd shutdown, and then they had to go to every second day. So it kind of messed with it a bit. But I thought some of these school boards, they came up with really innovative ideas about how to deal with the situation, given the what they were given as tools.
Oh yeah, again, and and there's going to be some teachers will have done better than others because some teachers are going to be more proficient with technology than others. But this was, it's not an easy year for teachers, not an easy year for anyone. So again, I give a lot of leeway, but where I won't give leeway is in 6 months from now. If someone says, "Hey, what do you have in place for next time?" and when some politician starts talking out their ass going, "Oh, well, let's not worry about that right now. This isn't the right time to be talking about that.
We're just getting over the old pandemic. Why would we start?"
2 stories. I don't know if we want to maybe talk about them both.
They're related here. So first we have a homophobic incident at Saskatoon Rainbow Crosswalk. So shows the need for pride, says transgender man. Logan Roberts was painting pride crosswalks on Wednesday night. And there was people driving by honking. There was a lot of support, but also there was some hate thrown their way, which is, we still live in a world where I guess just leaving people to be who they are isn't good enough. So there's that. And then related, the Swift Current Rainbow Crosswalk was also vandalized. And this, they say this is damaged yearly. So this is not a new situation. They've received good support from the community after this, but people they see a rainbow crosswalk and decide that they need to spin their tires out on it, I guess. And
disrupt the painting in one spot. It sucks. I was involved. I talked about, how this last 2 weeks has been a busy 2 weeks. It was kind of a blur for me because I was in the middle of doing Pride stuff in Regina over the last 2 weeks as well. That was part of my adventures with all this going on. But and in Regina, we were mostly lucky we didn't have that. There was one at the provincial flag raising. There was a gentleman show up who I don't know if his intent was to disrupt. It certainly seemed like it. He was he was spreading a bunch of anti-mask propaganda as well at the beginning. But by the time the flag raising actually started, he had wandered off. So I don't know if he just got bored waiting for us to start, but he certainly appeared to have been there to cause trouble. And he was one of the people who had caused issues a couple months ago with the church when there was that was going on. So the issue with the homophobic pastor and all that. So he was around. but again, it speaks. People always say, like, what do you have to be proud of? It's just how you're born. Like, don't be. You're not doing anything. You're born. Like, it's not about being proud of just plain being queer. It's about surviving in the face of adversity. It's about having to deal with this shit and still being open and still living your true life. And it's like, that's the part that people are proud about. And that's where why it's still needed.
I mean, we just had a big deal in our Regina City Council over banning conversion therapy. Yeah. Like, there was of course, pride still needs to exist because we still have onslaughts of people who are willing to fight against the rights of LGBTQ community. So, and
this is not so much directly related to the stories, but I will certainly say, at the city flag raising, there were probably some of the best speeches I've heard at a Pride ceremony ever, and the mayor stepped up. Like, Sandra Masters was someone that you and I both were on the fence about during the election. We weren't sure what type of mayor she would be. And I think the jury's still out on a couple areas. Right. But when it comes to this topic, she did not pull punches in her speech. She's done a pretty damn good job of living allyship rather than just talking it. So
good.
At this point, according to my queer ass, she's now moved into that category of, like, trusted is the wrong, but like trusted until she's not, as opposed to not trusted until she is. Like, it's there's that there's that line that's been crossed in some ways. So that's good. There's positive things that have that are coming out too, and there's positive change. And even these stories, they do talk about how when these things happen, the community does rally, and people are pretty united now that the open, overt, blatant shit ain't gonna fly no more. So that's a step in the right direction too. So I'll end with at least some of the positive stuff.
Tribal chief and Saskatoon mayor moved to rename John A. Macdonald Road. This is good.
Yep.
Get the John A. Macdonald name out of everybody's way.
Yep. Sure, there'll be a bunch of people who didn't care before, but will now be angry.
Of course. Why wouldn't? Why would they? Why would they have cared before? They didn't have to care, right?
No.
Yeah. There's not much extra to this. It's just really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, we've talked about this type of thing before as well. Like, it shouldn't be a big deal. If there's something that's problematic and they're fixing it, it's like if you see a pothole and the city gets called out to fix a pothole and they fill it. That should be the end of it. Someone said, hey, there's a pothole. And the city goes, okay. They send the road crews out and then the pothole's gone. That's the level to which this should be. Yeah. The only problem is you're going to have a bunch of people really angry, because how will we remember that there's potholes in roads sometimes if you don't leave that pothole there?
I'll remember.
How can I drive safe? How can people be expected to drive safely and remember that there are potholes in the road if you don't leave the potholes there? That's my silly analogy of the day. It's probably the stupidest analogy I've ever come up with, but maybe the most apt. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It definitely, it's worth it. It works. Saskatoon Board of Education is frustrated but determined after the approval of the 2021-22 budget.
Yeah.
We discussed this in the auditing section of the show, and with the everything, like the credit rating change, we're underfunding our education system.
Yeah. No, I think we can. Yeah, I think this is encapsulated. They talk about some of the other things as well. Talk sites, but again, it's the same general thing. It's, let's skimp on prevention and then just pour more money into cops to arrest people rather than create systems where people don't need to be arrested in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's so frustrating. It's from CTV News. It's so frustrating. More people sleeping outside in Saskatoon, community support officers say. So frontline services in Saskatoon are reporting an increase in the number of people sleeping outside and refusing to use various housing organizations in the city. I mean, it's nice now. So you're going to have people without homes who are more inclined to sleep outdoors if they feel comfortable doing that. I'm not sure about the housing organizations in the city. Like, if there's various criteria that people don't meet, so then they don't even bother going to a shelter or what have you, stuff like that. They talked to Stylus Assiniboine, says he's been homeless since he was released from jail around 2 months ago, and that he's currently trying to kick his addiction to crystal meth, but finds it difficult to sober up and secure safe housing. He says, my addiction is a problem because it makes me think people are judging me and they don't want to help me. And that's a fair assessment of the situation. Like, even organizations that are intended to help people with addictions, sometimes a person can feel judged. And this is something that, people who are living without homes deal with regularly.
Yeah. I was going to say I don't know the solution, but I do. Like, it's like we know Housing First Solutions work. Yeah. And actually providing indefinite housing, I say permanent housing even, as opposed to a shelter bed.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't people turning down a home. This isn't people turning down housing. This is people turning down a shelter bed for the night.
Yeah. Which is, like you say, like, if you don't feel comfortable in the shelter, I know. Yeah. Okay. A little bit of personal story. My brother has schizophrenia. And so he has been homeless many times throughout his life. And I'm currently not even sure where he's at. But often he would not feel safe in a shelter because of his mental illness. And there are many people that have similar situations that are like that, where you just don't feel safe. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Housing first.
Housing first. Yeah. And it's, if you go to the community support program website, I'm trying to figure out a bit more of what they are, because they use a lot of language that skirts the edge of saying they are not part of the police force.
Right.
They refer to themselves as civilian officers. So I'm not sure officers of what. Mm-hmm. So and like their logo looks very much like a police department logo, okay, but they don't say they are a division of the Saskatoon police force. So I don't know if they are or not. So I'm a little confused by that. Because again, if they are a part of
they're cops,
the police force, if they're cops, then I can also see why there would be a lack of trust about going with them.
Yeah. Like I just brought up the website and like, hey,
so either they're cops or really want to look like cops without calling themselves cops.
Like they really just look like cops. I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it is a division of the Saskatoon Police Force. Their website is very, I would argue, intentionally vague. So I think, so either they're part of the police force and intentionally trying to do everything they can to not really look like it and not come right out and say we're not the police because they don't want to lie.
Or they're cop-ish.
Or they're not cops and they're just trying to do the opposite, right? Look as much like cops as they can without saying we're cops, right? Like it's really weird, but again, if you are someone whose existence is already criminalized, I can see why going with them would not be where you want to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go with them.
If you look at their website, they are allowed to function as bylaw enforcement officers. So they are allowed to enforce bicycle bylaw, panhandling bylaw, park usage bylaw, spitting, urinating bylaw, traffic bylaw. So like jaywalking and skateboarding. So yeah, they're cops.
They're cops.
So the cops are upset that
people don't trust them.
That people don't trust them. Which and like go full circle on multiple topics today, right? Like
right.
And oh no, we're finally trying to do something that actually supports people instead of just beating them up, but people don't trust us. Well, yeah. Like this keep doing it forever.
That's right.
And eventually more and more people will start to trust you, but maybe not. Like no one owes you trust.
Yeah, that's right. Especially like this idea that they are they're designated by the city of Saskatoon as bylaw enforcement officers for things like panhandling or urinating in public or, parks usage. Like, I don't know. To me, if I'm a person whose life is on the street, I'm not going to trust these people no matter what, no matter how long they're there. Yeah. You need to remove your law enforcement from your support system.
Yeah. If the person who's trying to help you could also arrest you, then it's hard to trust them. So.
Yeah. Regina Diversity Committee on pause for further consultation after language and makeup concerns raised. 3 representatives from Black and Saskatchewan raised concerns about the committee mandate and more. So Regina's executive committee voted to not approve a diversity committee and instead sent the idea for more consultation after Black and Saskatchewan raised concerns over the process, language, and makeup. So I suspect there wasn't enough diversity on the diversity committee. And this caused them to miss some things. And until an outside organization brought it to their attention.
Yeah. And things like the committee needs to explicitly address racism. Like, yes,
that's what that. Yeah.
Yeah. We see that though, the watering down of language. This is me coming after liberals, so I know how much you love that, as opposed to leftists. So there is a liberal tendency to water down the language, to turn Pink Shirt Day into an anti-bullying day as opposed to one that specifically addresses homophobic bullying, to take messages that are explicitly meant to deal with anti-Black racism and turn them into everybody's equal, which feel really good on the surface but they don't actually address the underlying issues, right? They feel like they are, and they allow they allow this idea that the process and whatnot is going in the right direction. But like it's you need to address problems. You don't bring someone into the ER at a hospital with a broken leg and have a doctor say, well, every body part is important to look at. Right. Like you address the broken leg, and sure, you look to see what are some causes of that. You look to see what other parts of the body got impacted. When the leg broke, did he roll over on the ankle and sprain an ankle at the same time? Yep. Was there a blood clot that may cause heart issues down the road? Like you still look at other things.
But you really got to focus on that leg.
Yeah, you really got to focus on that leg. And, I think they're talking about how they're proposing the committee is 15 people. Having at least 2 people on the committee be Black seems like a reasonable request for a committee dealing with diversity.
Yep.
Now we have other marginalized groups within the city as well that need to be looked at. And how do you want to make sure you're not having one person who represents 7 different communities because of intersectional identities,
right?
And go, okay, we have one person who is Black and queer and a woman, so now that counts, like
right as all 3.
Like to some extent it will, but you just make sure it's well rounded as well, right? Like, do you have multiple voices? Do you have multiple sets of eyes that can see a lived experience that others can't see? Because I like to think I am fairly well versed on diversity issues, social justice issues. Like, this is a thing I care about.
Right.
I will never, no matter how much reading I do, no matter how many BLM rallies I attend or help organize or whatnot, I'm never going to have the lived experience of being Black. That is a lived experience I will never have, which is why when it comes to that issue, I try very hard when I'm in someone else's space to elevate that voice.
Yeah.
And then when I'm in my own space, like a wacky bi-weekly podcast, that's when I get to talk.
Yeah.
But again, on a diversity committee, people who look like me shouldn't be the dominant voice. I'm sure it's good to have, if I was on this committee, I could talk about queer issues and what it's like to be bisexual in Regina and whatnot, but
yeah,
we can't all look like me. Anyways,
right.
I'm now babbling incoherently with that.
I think it really, your point about the idea that no matter how much we read, no matter how much we learn intellectually, we will never have the experience of being an Indigenous person or a Black person in Canada and dealing with that racism in a personal way. I think that's very important to emphasize, because too often you'll say something like that is like, I can't know their experience. And people will say, well, I can read about racism. I can learn about racism. I can know about this stuff. And it's not the same thing. Like, you can learn about racism, but if you haven't experienced it, you don't actually understand it in the same way. And you need people to bring that perspective to you to help, change the system, change the world so that it doesn't happen that way anymore.
Yeah. Like, I'm 45 years old. If I had been Black by this point in my life, let's say, you factor out, 8 hours a night sleeping, maybe a little bit more when I was a kid or whatever. That's 250,000 hours of lived experience of being who I am. I have 250,000 hours of experience being white. And I didn't know I was queer as a kid. So let's chop that in half, or 2/3 of that. So 150,000 hours of lived experience being queer. So you know what? Sure. If a straight person decides they want to spend 150,000 hours reading and studying what it's like to be queer, then sure, I will say yes. You know what? At that point,
it's a lot of hours.
At that point, yes, you have the same amount of experience as I do. I'll grant you that. So you put in that 150,000 hours, and the same for me for being Black. If I put in 150,000 hours, or sorry, you're Black from birth, 250,000 hours, 250,000 hours of study, then maybe because if you are Black, every single moment of your life is spent being Black, is spent understanding that lived experience.
Yeah.
So no, you can't, you cannot read enough to know that. You just cannot generate that much experience without living it. So
yeah. So a video of invasive koi fish released in Saskatchewan is making ripples. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. So the koi fish is not native to Saskatchewan and should not be released in the wild. We do not, at the time that I read this, they did not know who actually released the koi. So yeah, it could be very damaging to the ecology. Yeah. Don't do that. If you're a person who has non-Indigenous species, do not release them into the wild, please.
Speaking of things not to do in the wild, great segue.
Yes. Also, do not feed the bears.
Don't release koi. Don't feed bears. Don't feed koi to bears.
I can't believe this has to be said. But okay. Do not feed bears and wolves and cougars and coyotes. It's now officially against the law. You shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. But okay. So now there's a law. Don't do it.
Great. What we need is more laws.
Yeah.
Regulations are written in blood, right? I'm sure someone did something really stupid. Oh yeah, it said there was an incident. The animal will be put down.
Yeah, because somebody decided to feed them, eh?
They're not pets.
No.
Like, wolves took thousands of years to become domesticated into dogs. This wasn't a you feed them 3 times and they're a puppy.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't be stupid.
Don't be dumb. Okay.
Sorry.
Our next, it's just a tweet from our friend Homefire SK, on True North Radio on Twitter. Cory Cardinal passed away. He was in prison. He was doing hunger strikes, and he has now died. So we referred to his story, his articles that he wrote when we were discussing prisons during COVID. And it's a tragic event.
I think that's another one of those stories I'm sure we'll talk about more when more information comes out. So
yeah. But for now, it's just sad.
All right.
And moving on to Judge rules Saskatoon City Councillor Darren Hill should remain in office.
Judge agrees with us.
Yes. His brain injury. Yeah.
This is what we expected the judge to rule. This is what the judge should have ruled. This seemed like it was a no-brainer. This seems like you don't fire people for
getting an injury.
Getting an injury, or I don't know about you, I'm sure I have misfiled paperwork at some point.
Oh, for sure.
And I've handed in paperwork a couple weeks late, especially on something that's not a critical piece of paperwork. I'm sure I have at some point in my career overlooked something and handed in a piece of paperwork later than I should. My boss come tap me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Dave, you needed to hand this in 2 weeks ago." "Oh yeah, sorry, I'll get it done right away." We've all done that. So.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then Regina Mayor proclaims July as Buffalo History Month at the Pool and Park renaming ceremony. This is more renaming stuff so that, to kind of help us deal with our past and our present mistreatment of Indigenous peoples.
Yep. Saskatchewan's the Lieutenant Governor spoke about how he was happy about it as well. Both being proud of the change because of his office, but also as an Indigenous person. So, again, we filled the pothole. There was an issue, got fixed. Should be that simple.
That's right. And this last one for the quick looks is not entirely sure what happened here. There's not a lot of details in the story, but it's from CTV News. 1 confirmed dead after an early morning house explosion in Saskatoon. This was published on June 19th, which was yesterday.
Yeah.
So
I am guessing anyone hearing it probably has a top 3 thoughts on what caused it, and I'm not going to start speculating publicly on what I think those top 3 would be, but I'm sure we'll hear more. It was a obliteration though. This was not a little an explosion that caused some damage. Sometimes you hear the term explosion and you go look at the picture and okay, a room got wrecked or something.
This house got gone. Yeah.
So
and it damaged nearby houses, it said.
Yeah. And
it's pretty amazing.
And my understanding is it was in a relatively affluent neighborhood as well.
Right.
It was. The neighbors were all saying this is not the type of thing that happens in a neighborhood like this. So
right. So
we'll see more what happens when more news comes out about what was going on. But I'm sure in about 3 months from now there'll be a small news story in the corner of a paper somewhere that says, "Oh, by the way, it was this."
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Sask Catholic churches delay and reject calls to release internal files on abuser priests, because that's what the Catholic Church does. Calls to release internal church records on abuse, residential schools grow following the Kamloops revelations. This talks about Joey Besarba and his story. He says he cries randomly while sitting in his apartment in the shower or out walking because of the trauma he's experienced. He was sexually abused. And from the atheist community, we were following the Catholic Church doing this all over the world for such a long time, with the sexual abuse of children. And you combine that with the trauma of the Indigenous treatment at residential schools, and you've got basically a horror story. It's just awful. Like, I find it hard to understand people who still are loyal to the Catholic Church as long as they're refusing to be accountable for the actions of past people in power.
The Catholic Church is an organization. I think people forget that sometimes. This isn't like a nebulous identity like Christian or Muslim or Hindu. Like, this is a specific organization. I myself am no longer Christian, but like, if someone still has a strong identity as Christian, more power to them. Like, I don't think anyone is saying you need to stop. You need to stop identifying as Christian because of things like this, because that's not an organization. That is more universal as far as a form of identity. But if you walk into a Catholic church and put $1 in the collection plate, you are putting $1 towards harm.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep.
Like that. Even if you're not doing it, and this is what people said about Trump 5 years ago, even if you didn't vote for him because of the racism and the et cetera, you're still voting for him in spite of it. Even if you're not putting $1 in the collection plate because of the child abuse or all of these other things, you're still donating in spite of it. Like, that money goes directly to people.
Yeah, it implies that it's not a line in the sand for you that children have been abused. It's just something that you're going to overlook.
So it's so many levels of problematic. They got let off the hook for the settlement money. Mm-hmm. At some point there needs to be consequences, and I understand governments are nervous about implementing them, but there comes a point where, the Catholic Church got out of paying their share of the residential school settlement by using trickery within accounting and loopholes.
Right.
That's, in my mind, that when you do that, all bets are off. At that point, if you are literally stealing from children that you abuse,
yep.
Why are we protecting them?
Yeah.
Why are we not using every tool in our arsenal to address that?
Yeah, I at this point, I don't actually understand why the government hasn't taken further steps in dealing with this. But yeah, no, you're right. The Catholic Church there needs to be some consequences.
And a lot of people wanted to have a lot of hope for Francis. And I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. A lot of leftists, progressives, liberals, what have you, are rightfully so attack and criticize, J.K. Rowling and Joss Whedon and various other people. And we talk about them being progressive for the 90s, right? They were progressive in the 90s for the 90s, but they're just not anymore. That's not like Francis was progressive for the 1890s. And we're still giving him credit for that because the last guy was progressive for the 1590s, right?
Yeah.
Sure, that's a big jump sort of in relative terms. The last guy was in the Nazi, or it was in the Hitler Youth. Okay, you're a step up from the dude that was in the Hitler Youth and created a new inquisition to hunt down nuns who were too progressive. That's what we're comparing Francis to.
Right.
Because that's what the last guy was. Okay, yeah, he's progressive compared to the guy who literally created an inquisition to hunt down progressive nuns and was in the Hitler Youth. But he's still the guy who canonized John the 13th and canonized John Paul II
Yep.
So like he's the guy who literally declared those who caused some of the greatest harm to be saints, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
He's not the good guy.
No.
And he's better at seeming nice on the surface, but he's not the good guy.
No. And I mean, he's even said still said things like that same-sex couples shouldn't be allowed to adopt children, stuff like that. Like he's still got some really, really archaic views.
Yeah.
And that's who's the head of the church. And
yeah,
there's still plenty of people within the church power structure that are not even as progressive as he is. So
yes,
we're not, the church is, in my opinion, the Catholic Church is an archaic institution that needs to be abolished, much like many other archaic institutions. And yes, continue being a Christian, go to another church, do something else. Don't support the Catholic Church. More Sask First Nations announce efforts to find graves of residential schools. We kind of talked about this in the headlines segment, but this is specifically the Battlefords Agency, Tribal Chiefs Inc., Star Blanket, Cree Nation, signal search plans. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that I don't really get is why it's up to the people who have suffered at the hands of these schools to go and search for bodies at these schools.
Yeah, agreed.
I think I might have read something that it didn't make into the show notes that the Saskatchewan government did dedicate a certain amount of money towards the search, though.
Yeah. So
that's at least something. It's not what I would consider necessarily enough, but
yeah. And I think what you need to do is talk to the tribal chiefs and the band council. You need to talk to the people within the Indigenous communities and ask them what their preference would be on who's essentially doing the work.
Right.
Because I don't know, because I don't know if this comes down to, as you said, why are we having the people who suffer the most having to be the ones who do the heavy lifting?
Yeah.
Conversely, the other position on this may be, do we really trust anyone other than Indigenous communities themselves?
That's fair.
To be looking into this.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think, find out, and then I don't know. I'm not the person who can know. But I think you speak and say, do you want us to take care of the logistics of doing the actual hard work, and have you involved, or do you want us to provide resources for you to take the lead on this process?
Yeah, that's fair.
And it may not be the same from community to community.
Right.
Where in a healing process someone is may very well influence that. But I think people like you and me shouldn't be the ones, and definitely people like Scott Moe shouldn't be the ones.
Right.
And I'm putting myself in the same category as Moe in this, right? This isn't actually a slam against Moe.
No, it's we're the white guys in the room.
We shouldn't be the one making that call.
Yeah,
we should be giving whatever support is needed, and finding out what that support actually should be, and not trying to guess and not trying to project our values onto others as far as what we think they should be doing to investigate this or how they should be investigating it. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
I think with that's enough for the night. Before we go, happy Father's Day.
Thank you to you as well.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Today was a triple whammy. It was Father's Day, it was my birthday, and I got my second vaccine today.
Wow.
That was my birthday present to me. It was getting up early, going down to the drive-through, 0 people in the line. This is, I guess we're not talking about doing a big COVID update in our podcast, but it was empty. I drove in the gate. They said there's no one there, and they were right. I drove literally straight into the to the garage, pulled right up to a nurse, and I was through in about 7 minutes plus the 15 minutes waiting in the parking lot afterwards. And of that 7 minutes, wild. 3 minutes of that was shooting the shit with the lady at the kiosk on the way in because she recognized me from my first vaccine. Oh. So
nice. I was not aware that you could take the Pfizer at one point and then the Moderna for the next.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Like everything else in my life. I reject having to pick one. I get both.
Yeah.
I'm by everything.
Awesome. That's perfect.
So, but yeah, no. So again, and it sounds like they're loosening the ages as of tomorrow. So, I expect those lineups will get a bit bigger now that more people can go. But
right,
it's if you're listening to this, if you're listening to this and only have one vaccine, or especially if you only have 0 vaccines in you, go get it. You can do it now. Yeah, you can definitely do it if you don't have your first. So
I'm still. I'm less than 21 days since my first, so I still have to wait. But
tisk. No.
Yeah. You can find us at anchor.fm/frommanypeoples. Our Twitter is at skpoliticspod. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/frommanypeoplesstrengthpod. You can email us at frommanypeoples@gmail.com, or you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/frommanypeoples. Now, only $2. So that's it for tonight, and thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you once again for all the work you do on the podcast, Cory. Take care.
You too.
All right. I think that's that is in line with other things we've talked about already. So
I was thinking as I was setting up some of these stories, we do this a lot, actually. We talk about the same topics over and over again. And it's not because that's what I'm looking for, right? I don't go out looking for social justice articles and stuff. This is what just comes across the CBC news feed, right?
Right.
Or CKOM or wherever. Like, I don't know. I'm not intentionally looking to...
well, they're news, right? Like we're talking about the news. And you know, we have recurring issues. It's not like any of these issues are one and done.
They didn't get fixed after we talked about them last time.
Yeah, right. So we started this podcast in 2020, and since then, racism ended. Like,
the police no longer arrest people unjustly.
Yeah, so it makes sense that we continue to talk about issues that continue needing to be talked about.
Yeah.